that's what I'm seeing when I interpret what's happening in the different societies and the roles of the different individuals. And you do see a break from nature, where nature becomes something, instead of something you're part of, something to be conquered.
Right.
And there's this separation there. And it sets up this perpetual conflict of things that used to be harmonious.
Well, and it's like if you're trying to conquer the thing that you also revere and fear, you get real weird about it.
I neglected to say push record before the most amazing introductions exchange.
We could aim for a dramatic recreation. I don't know what accent I affected, but
it's never the same. So I'm just gonna do a trademark story, a ramble.
TM.
When we were talking about needing one last guest for season 1, I said to Pam, I was just talking to my friend Steve Clef. You got to be precise with all the Steves in America. There's
a lot of Steves.
Yeah. He's doing a big project. It's been going on for years on Aphrodite. And he's kind of ready at this point to start talking about it in public, showing pieces of it to the world. And the neurodiversity thing, Neuroprovocateurs, that's the overarching theme. Steve, are you good to talk about how synesthesia affects? Because we've been working together, Steve and I, for like 20 years. So I've heard a lot over the years, but there's, we often have these separations between what we want on the public internet about how our brains work. And so it was like, Pam, Aphrodite, synesthesia, what do you think? And Pam was like, yeah, let's do it. And like 8 days later, here we are. So,
yeah, I'm happy to describe anything about synesthesia. I can't think of anything sensitive or embarrassing about it. So ask anything you want to know about that or the project or anything. And thanks for having me.
Awesome. I'm just going to ask Pam, you look so excited. What is your most burning question about Aphrodite? Please, let's have it.
I was just like, 2 of my special interests, 1 human. How exciting. How brains work. Greek mythology that extends beyond Greece.
There's a nice, connection with Aphrodite in that there's many, many versions of Aphrodite. And one is Aphrodite Mixus, maybe my favorite version. And it's basically when you combine 2 things and come up with a third thing. So here we are.
Yes, I remember learning about that there were so many specific Aphrodite varietals, because I think of both Aphrodite and then like Hecate, who also is a goddess that extends way beyond like the Greek mythology version. And it's so fascinating to me that everyone kind of rolls them into one or has like one idea of the goddess. And I'm like, Oh, how did you start discovering the different aspects of Aphrodite?
Yeah, I have a friend who's also friends with Jess, Katelan Foisy, who's just incredible everything, writer, artist, person. And we were talking about Aphrodite one day, and she said something about 2 Aphrodites. And I hadn't heard of that before, even though I thought I had a decent knowledge of Greek mythology. And just for some background, I was kind of an Artemis guy. She was goth, and she was independent, and all these qualities that I thought Aphrodite didn't have, right? So I had the kind of common perception of Aphrodite as you see in pop culture, where she's vain and shallow, and that perception of like the vain, vapid, vulgar Venus, right? And that was kind of what I had. And so I set off to find out more about two Aphrodites, and I learned first about Aphrodite morning star, or Venus morning star and Venus evening star, which are two aspects of the deity, and that goes back to prior deities, Inanna and Ishtar, and many of them, which but the average person doesn't. And then I read about Aphrodite Urania and Aphrodite Pandemos in Plato's Symposium. And so I have to tell you that when I'm reading this, it's the summer of 2020. And we've got, it's fun times. And we've got a raging epidemic. We've got a recession. We've got, a very volatile election that is happening, where we don't know the fate of the world. And we had the George Floyd verdict and the subsequent reaction to that verdict, and all that's happening. And, I'm kind of feeling at the time like I feel foolish making art. It seems self-indulgent, and it seems like nothing in the face of everything that we need to manage. And so there's a reason why I give you that background. So I'm reading Plato's Symposium, and someone's summary of it, and he talks about two different types of love. And he talks about the love associated with Aphrodite Urania, which in his opinion is the good kind, which is about the love that men share amongst themselves when they're talking philosophy and they're just hanging out and they're thinking about higher level things. And then the bad kind, which is from Aphrodite Pandemos, which is about, the physical connection between men and women and how that's a distraction from greater pursuits. And my first response was like, what an asshole, right? Like, what? Why is he putting these judgments on these things? And I was joking with a friend who I was explaining, like, this is the original bros before hoes statement, right? Where it's good to pursue one thing that has nothing to do with women and bad to pursue another thing that involves women. And I'm going to use this representation of women to further my opinion that people should be doing one thing and shouldn't be doing another. And so,
right.
I just set off to learn more and learned about 70 or so Aphrodites, and that's just within Greece. And then all the antecedents going back to the beginnings of civilization and then followed it up through today. So that's how I got started, was being annoyed. But the thing that was interesting was that there was a typo for the person who had summarized this, and they called her Aphrodite Pandemic. And so I just freaked out in the middle of a pandemic, and it made me think, it planted a seed that turned into the story that I'm in the middle of writing with my wife that I can talk about in a little bit. But it was shocking to see, that there was two, and there was an Aphrodite Pandemic, and, and I have to tell you that part of the responsibilities of Aphrodite Pandemos in Athens about 400 BCE was to maintain political harmony.
Yes.
So we're all tearing each other apart in the middle of a pandemic, and here's this figure whose job it is to achieve harmony amongst divisive groups, and she's incorrectly named as Pandemic.
Wait, but Aphrodite Pandemos is the one that in Plato's Symposium is representative of the love between men and women. Okay,
oh, I got this one.
It's very, very. Do you know where I'm going?
I think so, but I also have the linguistic explanation of why she would be called that in Athens at the time.
That's not where I'm going at all, but I want to know what it is in a minute. I'm thinking of like early 90s, men are from Mars, women are from Venus, like this idea that men and women are so separate. And like the whole internet knows how bad my periods are. My dude yesterday was like, it's stressful because I don't know what you want me to do to help. And I'm like, well, there's nothing you can do to help. And he's like, oh. And there is a very real, if we're using kind of gender essentialist biological categories, there is something profoundly different about a body that menstruates and a body that doesn't, hasn't, and never will experientially. So that there is like one very visceral gap in experiences, but then it's the Aphrodite who connects these people, who's also the embodiment of helping groups that might not inherently understand each other connect and get along. Do I have that right?
That actually does connect to linguistically what it means too, which is amazing.
Yes!
I was like, nerdy aside, and then back to Steve, because this is really fascinating and what an autocorrect. But Pan is all, and Demos is the Demes. So the Demes were how the Athenian military and society was divided into little groups. And so that is where democracy, demokratos comes from. You voted by Deme and you voted with the kratoi, the little stone guys. So Pan Demos would be all of the Demes together. You have to get along. You have to get along with each other to actually make society run. And so you have to have empathy for each other and you have to understand each other and you got to kind of be on board with each other. Otherwise, Athens goes, and so like to say that kind of love is not important is basically Plato being like, but I like to sit around and think with my boys. I just want to sit around and think with my boyfriends. Like, why do you want me to do anything else? When actually,
right?
Yeah, exactly. Don't judge me for wanting to hang out with my menfolk and write things all day. That is what I want to do. Like, my classics major has finally come in useful.
Does anyone know if pandemic shares like certain, in the sense of, oh, this virus is happening to everyone?
That's my understanding.
Across allness.
That is my understanding
of the people. So we all share it.
Yep. We all share.
Did we ever?
And did we ever?
It's funny because I haven't read the Symposium in a long time and I had forgotten about that. But like there was a lot in Greek culture that very much in some ways revered certain things about the quote feminine, but then also was very dismissive towards the feminine almost in everyday life. Like they were like, what a mystery. We respect it from like over here. Just go do some mysteries on that island so that like our harvest will work out. But like in everyday life, like maybe don't.
Right. Right. And you're not allowed to own anything. And it's been fascinating seeing the assumptions I would have as someone who's not steeped in history, learning about history, being dispelled, right? So you would think that having grown up in a civilization where women are subordinate and not allowed to be in positions of power, and certainly in religions, it's surprising to see religions where there are women with prominence, yet are still revered in a society where women are subordinate. I hope that made sense. But I would assume that, if Ishtar was a highly revered, very extremely powerful deity, then the role of women in that society would be not as subordinate, and it was quite the opposite, right?
Right. Which is fascinating because then when you were saying about like, oh, like making art during this time, what am I doing? I'm like, oh no, it is art that teaches us these lessons so things can change.
It's the shock that it's so well hidden. And so my kind of thesis for the whole thing was that Aphrodite was used as a tool to enforce a patriarchy.
Like the version of Aphrodite, like the small kind of like sliver of Aphrodite that we see now in popular culture, do you mean? Or
well, that's what I started with initially, and then I found all along the way that, every time I looked at a civilization or society where women were subordinate, those women figures were used to enforce that, right? So Aphrodite was kind of named by the Greeks, but existed as a deity on the island of Cyprus before that as kind of an unnamed deity. And Aphrodite is really the collision of a goddess from the east and this goddess who was on Cyprus. I'm going to talk about the goddess from the east for a second. So in Mesopotamia, where we've got our first written word and some organization of civilization, there was a pantheon of gods and goddesses, and one was a goddess of love and sex and fertility, but also of war and other qualities that later pantheons kind of assigned to male deities. She was just extremely powerful and fascinating. And as civilization kind of migrated a little bit west in Sumeria, we had Inanna, but then she became Ishtar in Sumeria. And then in Phoenicia, which is Syria modern day, she became Astarte. And as people from there kind of mixed with people from Cyprus, that goddess and Astarte kind of combined. And then when the Greeks arrived, she informed what became Aphrodite. So that's just the reason why I tell that history, is because Aphrodite, as we know her, is like at least 6,000 years old and predates the Greeks in a number of different forms. You know, I learned about Mesopotamian maybe grade 5 or something. So as I'm learning and remembering about this, you know, I'm learning that Hammurabi codified laws, and a lot of these laws aren't favorable towards women, right? You can't own property. Men can have affairs, but you can't.
Right.
There's lots of consequences for people who have abortions. And I'm trying to piece this together as a novice and understand, well, how does this fit with this, you know, very powerful goddess of Ishtar? And I see that Hammurabi said, I'm Inanna's favorite, right? And what I interpret that is that one of the reasons you should believe what I'm saying is because, you know, if you're a woman and you don't like what these rules are, let me put some of the blame onto this deity that you worship, who is also
let me take on as a man the audacity to say that I am speaking for Inanna. That is bold. Where do they find the audacity?
Well, you know, I mean, I was trying to trace the origin of it, right? Where does it all come from? I have some theories, and I don't really have the answer. I mean, there's some functional reasons, and if you read Creation of the Patriarchy, I'm blanking on her name, but I think it's Greta Lerner. You know, there's some explanation of functional purposes of how a patriarchy started, where your tribe would encounter another tribe and you would battle and you would kill the men and enslave the women because it was easier to manage.
Right.
You see some functional roots. It's devious, but it's practical, but it's not about audacity. What I have not seen written explicitly, but I've kind of pieced together, is that there was a period in history where women were revered, and the first deities were all goddesses for maybe 36,000 years. And man was connected with nature and saw this miraculous ability of women to give birth as not only a physical miraculous thing, but a very metaphorical thing of transformation and growth. And men are wondering, like, and what do I do, right? Why am I special? And you see a creation of things that aren't necessarily inevitable, like kingships and being a priest and being a banker and being a general, and these things that are constructed as functional roles that make them feel special. And so, like I said, I haven't seen like the missing link of how this all fits together, but that's what I'm seeing when I interpret what's happening in the different societies and the roles of the different individuals. And you do see a break from nature, where nature becomes something, instead of something you're part of, something to be conquered.
Right.
And there's this separation there. And it sets up this perpetual conflict of things that used to be harmonious.
Well, and it's like if you're trying to conquer the thing that you also revere and fear, you get real weird about it.
It's the garbage can with the pedestal in it in the cases that we have been discussing for the past several minutes. It's specifically women, but as soon as you're looking at a person, sticking them on a pedestal, they're no longer an equal human. Mm-hmm. And then you end up with this self-generated power struggle of like, oh, you're so much better than me, but now I feel bad, so I have to subjugate you so I feel better. And it's like, dude, like, nobody asked for this melodrama.
1-800 did I ask?
Well, and at the same time, a lot of these myths and tales have lessons of you can be special. You can be special through growth. You can be special through, internal growth, bringing things together, building, creating. You can be special through song and writing and art. You could even, if you grew a civilization and that's like an expression of community and growth, you're doing special things. It didn't have to be that way, right? It's not to say that people who can't have children have no function, right? And aren't miraculous. It's to say, what do you do with those opportunities? Do you subjugate a group that you're jealous of or afraid of? Or do you find your own ways to create and transform?
There was an anecdote that my therapist told me, and she was like, oh, I don't know if you'll remember this. And then she launched into a story, and I was just like, I'm going to remember this more than probably anything else you've ever told me. But it's like, of course, I'm going to remember the extremely obscure lake potato story. But she was... Anything else? No idea. But she was demonstrating to me a story of positive masculinity, because my partner was asking me about examples of positive masculinity, because he has oft been accused of being a boy lesbian. He was teased about being gay in high school. And he's like, why? Because I treat people with kindness and decency, do people assume different things about my sexuality, which are also, by the way, totally awesome things, just happen to be things I'm not interested in. And he's like, what? Why? And so she was like, oh, we'll give him this story. And I did. And he was like, what the hell? So by this lake, where it is extremely high altitude, there are people living there, and they still live in the ways that they did for however long people have lived there. And one of those ways is that they don't have electricity, so they don't have like refrigerators and freezers, so they need to preserve their food somehow. One of the things that grows there is potatoes. One of the ways to preserve potatoes is basically to kind of freeze dry them. So what they do is they like half dig up the potatoes, but then they leave them closer to the surface so that the dirt curates them overnight. So it kind of freeze dries the potatoes in the dirt. But they built like kind of a circle of stones around all the potatoes, and you have to keep animals away from your potatoes while they're freeze drying. So the men in this culture sleep with the potatoes on the potato freezing night, because they're like, the food for our group depends on these potatoes. We are going to sleep on these potatoes so that no animals get to them. And then the next day, like the women and the children come and they all do whatever it is that they do to the potatoes after they unearth them, like they all work together. But it is the men's very important job that they're like, we are the protectors of basically a lot of our sustenance for the next season. So like she used that as an example of positive masculinity, of like, we respect what the earth does. We respect that it actually preserves our potatoes for us if we kind of zhuzh them a little bit. But also we got to respect that like someone's got to guard the potatoes. Otherwise, like once they're closer to the surface, the animals nearby can come and easily get them. So she was like, that's kind of how she sees it, as like men can see what's happening with the proverbial potatoes. And if they yank the potatoes out of the ground, if they try and like do other things with the potatoes, it actually ruins the potatoes. If they're like, it is our job to literally protect, sleep with the potatoes, make sure they are okay. Excellent. Like you did it.
I know one of the running themes of the podcast is my like, and here's my different perspective from Serbia. And it very often comes back to the gender roles here are pretty rigid, and the men are very straight or they're not straight. So broadly speaking, you cannot kiss them when you have lip gloss on, because then they're wearing lip gloss, and it's a little weird for them. But strangely, and my gut says these things are connected, you can expect men to do actual nurturing and actual caretaking. And I'm like, if the cost of this is that they're a little squeamish about having lip gloss on their mouth, even if it's because they kissed a woman they're attracted to. Like, I think it's fine.
At first I was like, huh. Then I was like, then I would get to keep more of my lip gloss.
Yeah. It works out really well.
I'm reliving a moment in which last night my lip balm was forcibly stolen from my lips, in fact, by my boyfriend. He was like, I forgot my lip balm. And I was like, oh, that's too bad. And he was like, wah. Also, his reaction to my menstrual cycle is to bake increasingly elaborate baked goods to mollify what we call the sad walrus time, which is often followed by the oh no, I'm full of hamsters time. And so he's like, maybe if I bake the right thing, I will offer it as tribute to the sad walrus and the collection of hamsters. And maybe they will be kind to you.
And it's like, I'm just going to very sloppily call this like a normal worshipful relationship towards a goddess, as opposed to a deeply pathological one like Hammurabi, right?
He does not speak for the hamsters.
This guy seems angry. Let me offer baked goods. All right. I've taken us to Hammurabi. I'm going to pivot. Speaking of other non-pathological relationships to women, be they goddesses or Trish, who's, porous boundary.
Kind of a goddess,
yeah. I'm really curious what the creative process is between Trish and yourself in this graphic novel that's come out of all the Aphrodite research.
Yeah. So Trish is my wife, has been forever. As I was doing the research, I thought, especially in the summer of 2020, wouldn't it be great if we had a modern day Aphrodite to fix everything? What would that look like? What if our pandemic were that everyone was infected with empathy instead of a respiratory virus? How would that play out? So the craft of writing, Trish is a good writer. I've seen her writing, but I'm breaking things down of, this is how the different act structure works. And this is, when we're doing character backstory, let's start with their trauma. And then it's going to tell us about their current behavior and then their fear and just like a lot of the structure and work. And then what should it be and the sensibility. And then the creative ideas are a back and forth. And we'll work on that together. And it's just the coolest thing ever. Like I have always been interested in writing. And when I was listening to podcasts of the husband and wife team who did Westworld, and they were talking about how Joy was pregnant when they were breaking Westworld, and they spent a year just doing that. And I was like, oh my God, that sounds like the perfect life. Like that would be great. They're just working together and doing this for a living. And so I don't know that we'll ever do this for a living. I can't really think about any of that because it gets in the way of the progress of the story. But we get to sample what that life is like in these little moments where we get to work together and plan it out. And so then I will go and I'll write the script and then I'll run it by her, so then she's kind of like an editor, and I'm just always checking with her on things. And, I brought something up the other day. It was just like this little note that I had, and we don't really have these moments often, but she laughed. She's like, that's very male, the way that you did that. And I was like, well, that's why we're talking, right? Like, help me understand. So it's cool. It's, there's times when, you're going to have a different relationship with a creative partner than you have with your life partner. And I just have to do it well. Do you know what I mean? Like, I can't be selfish about my idea, and I can't, it's easy for me, as a man in my society, to be really forceful and kind of bulldoze without knowing it or wanting to do it. And so I'm just like aware of those kinds of things of, be creative in a way that's creatively productive, but always prioritize the respectfulness of the relationship and the interaction, because that's what matters. Even if you never get to move forward with the story. Like, don't piss off Trish because you love her and she deserves your respect.
Which is very in the spirit with Pandemos. So I'm like, go on. Yes, embodying that one as well.
I mean, I'm trying. It's not second nature, right? I just was not raised that way, and certain things are more positively reinforced in my society that contradict that. But I'm just trying to be aware, right? And trying to think about, who do I want to be and how am I not disingenuous when I work on this project?
May I ask a question about the sensory experience of working with your wife? Because it sounds like the two of you do have very different sensory processing experiences of the world. Is she also synesthetic or?
No. I mean, we have a lot in common, but she's not synesthetic. But I would say that we're both visual thinkers. And we have differences too. I'm very much like a systems thinker. Like, I need to understand how things operate before I can understand them. And she can just get things, without having to know atomic structure, so we complement each other in some ways, but we do also frequently say the same thing at the same time. And, so it's a mix.
That's interesting. Like, thinking about what you were saying about like character breakdown and things like that, and being a visual thinker, did you find yourself at all like having images come first or colors come first, or like the feeling of that and that informing the words, or the other way around?
It's always colors with me. I mean, everything is, I think in colors. I'm trying to verbalize this. But yes, the colors always come first. For people who don't know me, I should take a quick step back and say, so I have several forms of synesthesia. Synesthesia, if you don't know, means that you've got some senses that are intertwined in a way where they both fire at the same time. One of the more common forms of synesthesia is this color grapheme synesthesia, where if somebody hears a number or a letter, they associate a color with that. So I have that kind. I have chromesthesia, which means when I hear any sound, I see a colorful shape in my mind's eye. But I also see that colorful shape if I smell or taste or touch something. And I associate different emotions with colors. So if somebody feels a certain way, my brain interprets that by playing a little movie of different colors depending on what their mood is. And so, but I think of concepts in colors. And so when I think of stories, I see a little parade of colors, and then I start to think of pictures, and then I think of words.
Yes.
Can I interrupt for a minute with a very distant nostalgia memory moment? If I recall correctly, so Steve and I met because he needed models to do poses for him to then kind of base watercolors on.
You had blue hair at the time, which is why I was like, determined to work with you because you look,
I had Liz Bierman blue hair, so it wasn't like dump a bucket of manic panic on your head. Like, it had like layers and like,
you had like plumage.
She was an artist who had no other canvas but people's heads.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I remember. And then you showed up with lavender hair, and I was like, all right, I have to think about different things to say with these.
I felt so bad. I was like, usually you like warn people when your dimensions change, but oh yeah, I should have thought different hair color.
Great. No, there's some great paintings that came from that session.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, I was basically just painting colors at that time. I didn't really have, now I've got this, there's lots of story behind the things that I paint, but then it was just pure emotion and color, which is really fun. I kind of want to get back to that. I started this series like kind of erupted, where it started off as 6 figures and now it's 36. And it's kind of related to the Aphrodite, but the project could operate fine without it. But I'm just realizing as I'm talking to you now about this, they're very elemental and very just about emotions. Like paint, one of them is just painting calmness and one of them is painting anger. And I'm realizing that I think my brain was trying to get back to that way we used to work in this context. So Thanks for indulging me to understand myself. But Pam, what were you going to say?
Thanks for sharing all of that. This is, I mean, Pam, I'm looking at you to verify, but this is kind of where the podcast is like, oh, yes, we're doing it right.
Exactly. I have the color sound emotion smushage in my head. I don't know what the name of that one is, but I was talking about it on the music episode that's when I'm mixing my songs or choosing kind of sound palettes. I know that it's the right one because it's the right color for that song. And like collections of songs end up taking on kind of like complementary colors to one another. And so it's like, it's not necessarily like a consistent sound that's associated with a color. It's almost like it has to strike me and then the color happens.
I have a similar thing where the emotion color pairing is different than the sound color pairing. And so I find myself sometimes having to listen to music that doesn't fit, but the instruments trigger the sounds of the color associated with the emotion that I want to paint.
That's fascinating.
And so I have my painting music, which isn't always my entertainment music, because it's playing the colors in my head when I listen to it that I need to see when I paint to come through that painting. But if I'm just driving around in my car, I might not listen to that. Yeah, there's times when I'll find myself painting, like I'll especially during the pandemic, but even still, we do these art jams with artists all around the world, and we all paint together at the same time on a Zoom. And if I need to really feel when I'm painting, I can't do that because, they're going to bring up weird TV shows they liked or some fight with their landlord or whatever. And that's different colors, right? And so I have to figure out things that I could paint that are more about, all right, I've got the emotion set and I just need to paint a lot of folds in a drapery or whatever. And it doesn't matter if the colors are wrong while I'm painting it. I can persevere through that.
Right. You mentioned something in an interview that stood out to me was the other thought was that like you had presupposed that everybody was like this, that is what children do, is like we kind of presuppose that everyone has the experience that we have. And I was curious because I did not realize that other people did not have these sensitivities or overlaps. And so to me, it just seemed like everyone was just doing a really great job of like being real cool about things. And so I was like, maybe I need to be cooler about things. Maybe things need to, everyone else is going around clearly with these kinds of perceptions, but they're being a lot more chill than I am. Like, what brought it to your, I guess, like what brought it to your conscious mind that you had a different experience than others? And I guess, what was that like being like, oh, not everybody sees things this way?
I had always, how did I find out that not everybody did this? I think I just asked somebody like, do you see the same squiggles I see when I hear Jimi Hendrix? And they were just like, what are you talking about? No, no one sees squiggles when they listen to any music. But part of what got me there was I started thinking about how I associated colors with numbers. And I just thought like, oh, well, I must have, or letters actually. I must have, when I was in school and they were introducing the letters, a lot of classrooms will have the alphabet on the wall and they must have just been in those colors. And that's what I associated with. And then I remembered like, no, it was handwriting. It was white letters on a black background. Well, that's strange. Where did it come from? And so I started Googling, seeing colors with numbers. And then I first encountered the term synesthesia. And then it, just described like, 4% of the population has this and it's genetic and, all the things that you learn about synesthesia. And so I kind of felt special. I felt good. Like it was, superpower. And colors are so important in my world. I realized like there's another existence where I wouldn't have had all this. And I prefer this existence with all the colors. They're so important. So then I talked to people. I didn't tell people for a long time. Obviously I told Trish, maybe have told my parents about it. But for a long time I didn't say anything because it seemed like no one's going to believe me or it's just going to bring, unwanted attention. And then I remember when I would work at a company, maybe like a year or two into it, if I had good friends, I might tell somebody about it. And now I just kind of tell whomever. I don't know. I got used to it. I felt less, you know what, it gets weird. People start to see you as like entertainment or something other, right? Well, what's this color? What's that color? And, do some tricks for me. And I'm fine with that now. But at the time it was just not desirable to get that type of like uncomfortable attention. But the other thing that has changed things is now there's 3 or 4 interviews with me out there talking about this stuff. So if you Google Steve Kleff, you'll see it. And so then I actually started putting it in my artist bio and just saying like, this informs why I paint what I paint. And I'm trying to paint emotions and I see them as colors. And so that's why this looks like it does. Because my paintings are, they're very vibrant. They're very unrealistic colors, unrepresentational. Technically, I guess you could call me a fauvist in art speak, but I want to explain that that's like a feature, not a bug. And that it's tied into something with some meaning as opposed to a superficial inclination to just, use magenta and turquoise all over the place.
The second module of my undergrad, which I may or may not finish because I banked my credits and have until February to circle back and finish it up. It's basically like an intro to psychology. And they're doing this thing with the curriculum where they're like, hey, it's been a few weeks. You want something flashy? Here's synesthesia. And in the synesthesia part, we did, there were all sorts of, really interesting facts about like the synesthesia Stroop test and how people with synesthesia will demonstrably and persistently associate the same colors with each number or word or whatever, where people who are making it up and trying to remember, like come back a few months later, nothing. But then as like the big finale to that section, they're like, and here is a painting with some colors and what the artist sees in it. But it was just kind of colors. And you would click on this patch of color and say, okay, the artist feels this. And I remember being so irritated because I know of one artist who has synesthesia and it's all very visceral and, kind of legible. Like you're looking at your painting, Steve, and really getting a sense of like something, even as a person who doesn't directly associate feelings with colors. And so I'm like, this is the part I'm worried is going to come out bad. I'm like, I'm sure there's more artists like this where you have like a real experience as a viewer and they're just like, click on the color, we'll tell you what it means to the guy who put it there. And I'm like, missed opportunity.
Yeah, I'm very aware of that, right? So I know that I couldn't just paint colors because they don't mean anything to anyone else, right? And that's your job as an artist is to capture and evoke emotion. And the worst thing you could hear as an artist is like someone's lack of a feeling towards something you create, right? Like, oh yeah, it's nice. It's nice. I could only draw stick figures. Like, you want people to cry or scream, right? When you see your work. And so I know that like, and maybe it's because among synesthetes, like our colors are different for each other, right? So like, I was talking to somebody and I said like, well, what's your A? And they're like, oh, it's red. I'm like, you know what's up. Yeah, A is red, but plenty of people, A is yellow. And so my sons have it and all of us have different alphabets. And so it'd be super cool if there was some untapped part of consciousness where there was this undercurrent of meaning associated with colors and only synesthetes could access it. And if you painted a certain color, people would feel a certain way because you all share that universally. That'd be awesome. But it's not the case, right? It's just like, for me, hope is blue. And so I need to paint something hopeful or something that looks like hope. And I will make it blue because it helps me care about it. But if I assumed that somebody else would feel hopeful just because I painted blue, I would assume they'd have the reaction you had. And I don't think it's anything to apologize for. I mean, as an artist, I should say that anyone who takes the chance to express themselves should be, supported and respected. But, there's also a job as an artist to think about the person who's looking at your work, I think.
Coming off of the specialness, love what I'm perceiving as you saying a couple minutes ago, that it would be really cool to be somewhat collectively accessing like a pocket of like shared, which as much as every person with ADHD or autism or the combo platter is different, there is among all three groups this frequent like, oh my God, a person whose brain kind of brains the same. we're all on Linux. This is great.
And sure, you might have different customizations than me, but at least what you said reminded me. I don't know if either of you have read the book The History of Color, which is about like the associations throughout time and different cultures. It's a cross-cultural and art history reference of the signifiers of different colors. So I think it's just the 7 basic ones. But it's really interesting thinking about why a synesthete might associate potentially a color with a specific word, emotion. Like when you said the thing about like the color of A, I was like, oh, I wonder if 7s are aggressive to him as well. Like 7s are just real aggro. I don't know why. But like
No, 7s are chill for me. 7s are
wow. Anytime I see a 7, I'm like, oof.
No, they're kind of it's this weird thing where 7s are mostly blue, but there's some green, and it's somehow it's this like sarcasm to it. It doesn't.
Yeah.
It's nice to talk to somebody who understands. Because,
like sevens have an edge, whereas like 2s and 8s, I'm just like, oh, hi. But like 7s are just like really aggressive to me.
Yeah.
I'm so curious also, like I would love to know the music that you listen to potentially when crafting some of the paintings that I've seen, because I'm curious what they sound like to you, because they have a certain sound to me, much like when I am crafting something. That's why I've even designed my room a certain way to evoke the feelings that I like to evoke. I'm like, oh, that would be really interesting to like almost like reverse engineer the experience.
When we had the Aphrodite mixes, my brain went mixtape, but it wasn't really the time in the conversation to ask for that. But is there, to piggyback, there an Aphrodite mixtape?
Yes, it's interesting. The Aphrodite Pandemic playlist is more about the lyrics and the people who are singing it. And then there's an Aphrodite playlist, which is slightly different. But again, it's really not about how it sounds. It's just saying, it's bringing certain artists who have an energy that I think fits, and certain lyrics. There was a crossover. There's an artist named Ella Minus, who I think is Colombian, but the music fits and the lyrics fit. And it's not often that I find that. I'm sure there's lots of those out there, but it would require a lot of hunting to find that stuff. I would love for somebody's algorithm to start feeding me these things, but they're making matches based on like music structure and instruments and things like that, and not so much like Steve Synesthetic spectrum overlaid with meaning. But I listen to a lot of electronica, which is a mix. Like sometimes it can be meaningful and sometimes it's not. And, it serves a different purpose, but the instruments really trigger a lot of the violets and turquoises and magentas that I need in what I do.
Yes.
And a lot of the music where the lyrics fit what I'm talking about just like shows up as like yellow and black, and I'm not going to paint to that. So I have to figure out, how it all fits. The band Tool is actually pretty perfect. The music evokes colors. In fact, Tool's my favorite band now, and there was a time where I thought Tool was okay, and I wound up with a ticket to their 2001 Lateralis tour. And I was like, oh yeah, I like Tool, and the music's good, and they have some bass. And I hadn't really heard the album that had come out because I was in Hawaii and I was disconnected from the world, or I would have liked them. But I go there and the show looks like my brain. It's all magenta and violet and turquoise. They have these performance artists whose name I can never remember coming out and walking around and doing amazing things. My now friend Chet Zar's animations are playing up. I mean, it looked inside my head. It was like one of the craziest experiences I ever had. And then I went and listened to the lyrics, and they're informed by, Jung and philosophy and psychology, and there's astrology in there. And it's just, I was like, oh, this has everything. And so I listened to Lateralis every day for 10 years.
This completely tracks.
Yeah.
I've often wondered if the people that Maynard works with are synesthetic for that reason, especially some of like the album art that I think it's Alex Gray has done.
Alex Gray, some of the art. Well, I know Chet's synesthetic, but he's synesthetic in an interesting way where he is lexical gas stream. I forget what it's called, but he has a taste when he hears a certain word.
Wow.
Yeah. Which is fun. And if you don't know Chet, he is... what you may not know is like he's the nicest guy in the world, but he's also like a legendary dark artist. He's like maybe the most prominent dark artist around today. And so his synesthesia doesn't really factor into his art that much because he's got he's not painting food. He taps into a subconscious of struggles of the psyche and a lot of embracing the darkness and understanding people's fears and but also the sympathy that he has towards monsters. So he's an interesting guy. I just don't know if they do for Chet. I know it's, I mean, I can ask him, but
so it's like words have taste, but
words have taste. I don't know if feelings have taste. Like so like I said, I have like 5 or 6 different kinds, and a lot of people they may only have color grapheme, or they might have the kind where some people see days of the week as physical shape.
Mm-hmm.
And so not everybody has multiple kinds. So I don't know if Chet's like taste is like his color. I want to, if I'm in a position someday, curate a show with a bunch of synesthetes. I know a lot of them. Kelly McKernan's an artist who has very vibrant colors and is an artist, Alison Sommers. There's a bunch of them out there. I'm forgetting people now, and I feel bad that I forget them, but they translate it in different ways. And then I recently discovered, I forget what I was looking at yesterday, that apparently Billie Eilish and Beyonce and Olivia Rodrigo all have the same kind that we have, where they see colors when they hear sounds.
I was just going to bring that up, that Billie Eilish has spoken about it in an interview, that she produces her music primarily with her brother Phineas. And it's fascinating to me because when I first heard her music, I really connected with it and I couldn't figure out exactly why, but like it felt so correct. And even though I would say lyrically, sometimes I relate and sometimes I don't, there's the texture of the sound and the way that she sings, like definitely is very vivid to me. And then the way that then I saw used color in her art made so much sense to me. I was like, oh yeah, okay, this tracks. And then when she mentioned being synesthetic, I was like, oh, okay, yes, correct. It all makes sense.
You know what's interesting? So yeah, I get a lot of vivid imagery when I hear her music. And actually, I started the Aphrodite Pandemos playlist with a lot of songs from her 2019 album. I don't know, where do we all go when we're sleeping?
When we all fall asleep, where do we go?
There we go. Thank you. And but I just see a lot of like blacks and silver and pink. Like I have not yet found the painting project that would fit with the colors that I see when I listen to her music, or at least that album. Some of her other stuff more recently is like brighter. One of the things I was excited about with that album was that it visually, chromatically, it was very dark with lots of slivers of light. And I was like, oh, this is great. And then it seemed like, I don't know, she worked through some things and got happier, and it was different colors. I don't know what's going on there, but
that album feels black, white, and turquoise. Like to me, it looks black, white, and turquoise. Like hearing it,
I wish.
You're like, I wish I saw the turquoise in there.
Yeah, that'd be great. Very convenient.
Yeah, I'm just like, there's slivers of light in there, whereas like I do really like her earlier work does feel like softer colors, whereas that one feels like really bold. Whereas like I remember the first time I heard Ocean Eyes, I was just like, it's interesting that she's singing about like an ocean, but that song is very like mauve and lavender and like it's not blue to me. And so it was interesting to contrast with the lyrics, but like then seeing like her later work, and I'm curious now if Phineas is also synesthetic, because he does the production work with her. He does all those layers. So I'm like, It could be like, I don't know if you've seen the video of David Lynch directing Angelo Badalamenti to make the score for Twin Peaks.
No, sounds fascinating.
So they're sitting together at the piano, and like Lynch is basically narrating different feelings and like the scenes essentially. And then Angelo is kind of playing, and either David will be like, yes, Angelo, yes, and like keep going, or he's like, oh no, Angelo, no.
Well, there's emotions being evoked, so that's good.
Yes. And it's really funny watching like someone's visuals be translated to sound in real time, and also that the trust that they have together is that Angelo can withstand both the yes, Angelo, yes, and the no, Angelo, no.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. That's what I would cling to if I were Angelo. Is like, well, at least he's feeling something.
Yes.
Often I have a way to sort of smoothly wrap us up. Unfortunately, colors and music are a reach for me. And the overlap and entwinement of them, it's just, I'm like,
you're like,
but it has been so awesome listening to the two of you interact about these things. I'm like, this is fascinating.
Was this your secret plot to just put us in the same room?
You know, it was a secret hope that this would occur, but you know, we never count on that.
I mean, I feel like what you're tying together in talking about synesthesia and about the different forms of Aphrodite and the thesis of your project is kind of the thesis of the podcast of like bringing awareness to diversity and thus empathy to other people's experience, where you're like, oh, like I might share part of this experience with someone, but if I don't, I can be fascinated by it. I can be interested in it, even if it's not my experience. I can be like, oh, what's that like for you? Without judgment, just more of a curiosity. So you embodied the ethos of the podcast.
Well, I'm glad. Yeah, I mean, I have no idea if anything I would have to say is interesting. I did hope and do hope that people will try and learn more about Aphrodite. There's so much that I didn't have time to cover. And so I hope people are interested and learn more about her, whether it's there's a great book called Venus and Aphrodite, A Biography of Desire by Bettany Hughes, which, you know, if you do one thing, read that book. There's also, she's got a handy hour-long video, which basically tells you what's in the book, if you want to do it that way. And if anyone wants to join my free, for the most part, Patreon to see somebody struggle writing a book for another 6 to 12 months, hopefully is all it'll be, they can do that. But thanks so much. I listened to a few of your episodes before this just to get a sense of what I was getting myself into, and it was all really fascinating. And I'm grateful that you're doing what you're doing and giving voice to some people who may not have had a voice otherwise. So thanks for that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. It was very generous of you, and I'm very excited that Jess is like, now I will put my special interest people together and record it. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Neuroprovocateurs. Please join us on Substack, where you can find exclusive clips, resources, and community of the neurospicy variety. We are an independent podcast, so know that your support on Substack and beyond means the world to us, quite literally. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to leave us 5 stars and glowing reviews and follow our podcast on your preferred podcast platform so that you can be sure to get each episode the moment it drops, and know that your reviews help us get in front of other people who might also want to listen to this podcast. We are on social media in all of the usual places as Neuroprovocateurs.
Thank you again, and excited to see you for our next episode.